Welcome to our webinar on how to build a second-party food audit program. My name is Holly and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Bob Strong. He's our industry leader and senior consultant with SI Global. Been with SI Global for a number of years. He is really the driving force behind our food safety operations in a number of different areas, GMP, a number of GFSI standards. He's a trainer, a consultant, has worked with a number of different organizations, all shapes and scales and sizes, and a wealth of information. And I'm very pleased to welcome you, Dr. Bob. Over to you.
Thanks, Holly. And as Holly said, we're going to make a presentation, but at the end we will answer questions. So don't forget to put any questions you have into the chat room. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about second-party audits, but we're going to talk about why don't you go with the GDP audit, which has been around for 50 years and which we used to do all the time. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why, if you don't want a GDP audit, why not one of the GFSI audits that's been around for the last 15 years? Why would you add an addendum to a GFSI audit? What does that bring to you that the GFSI audit was not? And then why would you develop a second party audit and make your suppliers go through a second party audit? We'll talk about those because each of these brings with them advantages and sometimes limitations, but in most cases, most of these are very good audits to determine your food safety standards. So we've seen across the years that people have generally started to move away from GDP audits, which we did for the prior 50 years. And they started to do this in 2004, obviously when GFSI came out with approved schemes, and these were developed throughout the world and were meant to be the audits that would replace the GMP audits. And the answer to these was that these were to fulfill a promise, the GFSI promise, that one certified accepted everywhere, meaning these were totally global, whereas GDP tended to be national, and people were buying a lot of products across country lines, and they wanted assurances that the products would be safe. So GFSI was to take things and make them global. And so therefore, why does a second party audit bring that GMP and GDP and GFSI does not bring? And we'll talk about that. So I'm going to do a little bit of a poll. So Holly, if you could conduct the two polls so we can get a feel for who is on the call today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. So let me click launch on this poll. I'll read the options. We'll leave it about a minute. So what are you currently certified to? In this job, Dr. Bob will help you sort of understand where folks are, and this can kind of cater the language, and folks will share, as I mentioned, to see where you sit amongst your peers. So what are you certified to? Perhaps it's just a GMP or GDP based audit based on the federal requirements. GMA safe. Perhaps you have a GFSI standard, or perhaps a GFSI plus a customer's addendum, or maybe you're not certified to any standard. And lots of variations out in the industry, Dr. Bob. I'm sure you can comment on kind of the different areas of the food chain industry, and lots of variations to this for sure.
Yeah, I would think that most people are now being approved to some type of GFSI standard. The question is, are they having to do an addendum as well? Though there are still some that are back at the GMP, and we do have a few clients that we still do GMA Safe for, which came out in 2002.
Yep, that's great. Okay, we'll leave it a few more seconds here. I'll close and share the results. Excellent, thank you everyone. So really quite a broad audience. 10% have a GMP or GDP based audit. 46% have a GFSI standard, 19% have a GFSI plus a customer's addendum, and 25% are not currently certified to any standard.
All right, so obviously based on that, we don't have any GMA safe people, and that was an audit that when it came out was brought out by the Grocery Manufacturers Association and was supposed to be the audit to end all audits, and unfortunately 2019 it apparently has almost disappeared. So let's do the next poll and let's get a little bit more information from our attendees.
Yep. So again, let me launch it here. So what do you require of your suppliers or distributors in order to, what do you require them to be certified to? So let me launch. So again, looking at your suppliers or distributors, do you require them to be GMP, GDP standard, certified GFSI standard? Perhaps you don't require anything at the moment, and this is why you've joined us today. I expect we'll see quite a varied response on this one as well. I'll leave it open for about 10 more seconds here. Excellent, thank you everyone. Yep, and 20% say GMP, GDP, 44% say GFSI, and 36% say nothing at the moment.
All right, well, that's interesting. Obviously, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each of these different audits that are available and still available today, even though some of them have been around for 50 odd years and some of them are a little bit more recent, and talk about the advantages of them. And then it comes down to exactly what type of information are you trying to gather on your suppliers that's important to you when you're making decisions about buying ingredients, buying packaging materials, or purchasing a retail product to go into your stores, particularly if it has your name on it. So let's talk about GMP and GDP audits. These have been around for years, as I said, but unfortunately they're not what we call accredited audits. That means there isn't an accreditation body involved in making sure that these are all developed to a certain content and grading, and that the auditors are trained. And these were very good audits, and there's nothing been wrong with these audits except they were specific to whoever owned the audit, which was usually the certifying body. And each of us had our own GMP, GDP audit, and they served a great purpose. But unfortunately, there was variations in them, and therefore when it came to globally, they weren't always acceptable once you got outside of the area in which you manufacture. And we sell a lot of our products outside of the United States or Canada. We also didn't talk about quality in most of those audits. There was no quality requirements in those audits. So if you're looking for quality, generally that is not part of a GMP, GDP audit. There's almost nothing in those audits also where you are asked to justify label claims like GMO, organic, gluten-free, because these are based on food safety, and those things are generally looked upon as more quality, even though we can get into a theoretical argument on GMO versus non-GMO. And most of those audits had nothing to do with weights and measures. But that could be very critical to you, particularly if your name's on the product and you're selling a retail product and it has to meet the legal requirements of matching the weight that's on the label. If you're not going to have your auditor do that when they're there doing a GMP, GDP audit, who's going to be doing it? So then along came GFSI. And GFSI, as I said, was developed in 2000 in Paris by the leading retailers in Europe, which included England and all of Europe. And they wanted standards that were going to be global so they could trust the food safety of these products as they moved across international lines. And so therefore the schemes that were approved initially were based on global food safety standards, which were put together by GFSI, and they were totally international, and they brought some credibility because these were accredited audits. What did that mean? That meant that the certifying body didn't own the audits. The certifying body was auditing to an accredited audit that was developed by a scheme owner. And therefore you had three, it was a third party audit because one party would be the people you're auditing, a second party would be the auditor from a certifying body, and the third party would be the people who owned the audit. And it was felt therefore you could get the audits to more of a standard international food safety requirements. The one thing about it is that they didn't limit it to food safety. They said to the scheme owners, if you want to add other things to your audits, like quality, like weights, like shelf life, if it's based on quality, you can do that. But you don't have to do that. And if you do that, we will not be benchmarking those parts of your audit against any international standard. So the one thing you have to understand about GFSI audits, they are based only on food safety as far as being benchmarked. So therefore, when you look at the 4 GFSI audits that are the most common, BRC, SQF, IFS, and FSSC 22000, you have to understand that they do vary on their content as to whether they've added additional things. In some cases, those additional things are optional, like you don't have to do quality with FSSC 22000 unless you do the additional audit for quality. You don't have to do quality with SQF unless you want to do the SQF quality additional audit. But with IFS and BRC, you can't avoid being judged on quality because it's in their audit. Therefore, as we say, these schemes vary. The length of certifications vary. Most of them are for 1 year, which was the same as the GMP, GDP. But FSSC 22000, the certification is for 3 years. And in between years, you get what they call a maintenance audit. So you do get an audit every year, but your certificate's good for 3 years. Also, these GFSI audits vary. Some are scored and graded, some are just scored, and some of them are not scored or graded at all. And therefore, all they are is a list of your non-compliances. So what are you looking for? If you're looking for something that's scored or graded, then you have to pick whichever GFS scheme you want. If you just want to score, then you're limited to, again, a GFS want and score or graded and just want to list the non-compliances, you have to pick FSSC 22000. There's also a difference when you look at them on how long you have to fix your non-compliances. And in some of those, it's a limited time, like a month. On others, it's until you have your next audit, depending on the severity of the non-compliance. These audits have gathered quite a traction across the world, but not all of them are known outside of certain areas. So you have to, again, determine where are you located, where is your customer located, which scheme will your customer accept, which scheme does your customer understand, and does your customer even know what a particular GFSI audit is if it is not something that is common in the country in which they are located. So what additional considerations beyond the GFSI scheme should I be looking for? Now, as I go back again, I go back to the fact GFSI stands for Global Food Safety Initiative. It wasn't intended to include quality, and therefore it is not the option. So if you want quality, you're limited to 2 GFSI audits. But maybe that doesn't fulfill all the things that you want or your customer wants. And so it's up to you to determine what do you want and what does your customer want you to do and what does your customer say with regard to what your choice is going to be. But all of them are based on the fact that you have to put out a safe product and it has to be in compliance with whatever the GFSI scheme is that you choose. And it also has to be in compliance with the local government regulations of the country in which you make the product and the country to which you sell the product. But then we look at federal law, particularly here in the United States. And the FDA has no jurisdiction in quality at all. And so therefore the FDA themselves is only interested in food safety. So when they come out to regulate you, they do not get into shelf life if it's based on quality. They do not get into the quality of your product, the color, the flavor, the texture, or any of those criteria that may be very important to your customers. So if you're taking a GFSI audit and thinking that maybe it always fulfills all the requirements of all of your customers, that may not be true. And in that case, you may have to pick a standard which fulfills the requirements of your customer, which also has to therefore meet the requirements of the federal government, but that is based on food safety. And that is where the regulators are charged with making sure that all the product that's out in the marketplace to be consumed by the public is safe for the public to consume. When we look at auditor training, there's differences. The training of the auditors for each GFSI scheme tends to vary. Some of the schemes only train their own auditors. Therefore, they don't allow you as a certifying body to train your auditors. SQF will not allow anybody to train the auditors except SQF themselves. Other GFSI schemes, you can train your own auditors to the standards that are required of that GFSI scheme. And therefore, certifying bodies are allowed to do the training of their own auditors. Some schemes provide the training materials, so it's not like you can just train your auditors to any level you want. You have to train them using the training materials provided by the scheme owner. Some require mandatory auditor refresher training when the scheme is updated. Some of the GFSI schemes don't, which sometimes becomes a little bit of an issue because then you have to be sure that the auditors know what changed and understand what changed and understand how to interpret what changed. At the same time, you have to know what changed and how to make sure you're in compliance with what changed. Well, when it comes down to auditors, you don't want the auditors sometimes coming in not quite understanding what the changes are. So again, the GFSI schemes are good, but they do vary. When it comes to label claims, most of the GFSI audits do not get into addressing label claims. It's part of what is considered audit quality. It's not considered part of the benchmark GFSI scheme. So therefore, sometimes when the auditor comes in, he will not get into a discussion with you about GMO or non-GMO, or organic or not organic, or gluten-free. Now, in most cases, if you've seen, organic certification is different than GFSI certification, different than GDP or GMP certification, and it is done by qualified auditors working for organic certifying bodies. Audit criteria, when you look at it and you start to read through the GFSI audits, you have to sometimes interpret for yourself what exactly it means because they're not very prescriptive. Therefore, it comes down to sometimes it's left up to the knowledge and the experience of the auditor against that scheme. Now, in order to make sure that that is under control, auditors are only approved to do those food sector categories that they are knowledgeable of, have experience in, and know what to expect when they come in. So it's not like you just turn out a GFSI auditor and say, you can go audit any type of facility. They can only go audit those that they can prove they have experience in. But still, again, it comes down to it's not necessary as prescriptive. Now, does that matter to you? Does that matter to your customer? If it doesn't, they're very good audits. They've got international acceptance, and the amount of certificates given out every year increases every year. And GDP has tended to fade into the background because these audits are a little more involved, a little more nationally and internationally acceptable, and are done by better trained or the more knowledgeable, maybe that's a better word, auditors. So what are the benefits of going to a second party audit? So if everything's working really well, why would I add an addendum, or why would I go to a second party audit? Well, one of the problems is if you're a retailer. So let's talk about retailers who are driving most of these addendums, and they're driving most of the requirements if they're going to a full second party audit. A lot of the products going into their stores carry their name on them. Or if they don't carry a name, it's assumed to be theirs. Because a lot of produce doesn't carry a name. A lot of meat doesn't carry a name. And you would go into the store and you would associate that meat or that produce with that store. And therefore, there is no national brand label on there. There is nobody else to complain to if things are not right, from a quality point of view or from a food safety point of view. So therefore, when you do an addendum, sometimes you're adding those things to a GFSI audit or to a GDP audit that are really critical to that retailer's customer base. And what is that customer requiring? And a lot of times the customer requiring more than a food safe product, that's a given. They're requiring a good quality product. They're requiring a product that has good shelf life, or at least lasts till the end of the shelf life that's on the label. Now, in order to do that, you have to either in an addendum or second party audit, add some additional questions and have the auditor stay and do an addendum. So if you look at the addendums that you may be being asked to be judged against, you'll notice the questions in there are not a repeat of the questions in the GFSI audit. They are additional questions that the retailer is saying, I want to know this while you're there, because while you're there, you can look at more things than the GFSI, and it'll say, we happen to go there, and I want you to get answers on these things. And those will be things like quality. They'll allow you to get into the shelf life claims. Because right now, in most of those GFSI audits, if you ask is shelf life based on quality, and the answer is yes, you move on because you're doing a global food safety audit. Therefore, shelf life only comes into play in the audit if it's based on the food safety of the product. If it's based on quality and the GFSI standard you're using has no quality in it, then you obviously as an auditor have nowhere to record any of the information about shelf life claims because your audit doesn't have any quality line items in it. So the second party audit or the addendum allows you to add those. Just the same as if you're making an organic claim or a GMO or a gluten-free claim, where does the auditor record that if the audit doesn't have that as part of the GFSI scheme? And yes, so we're seeing gluten-free, and we do those gluten-free audits for some of our customers. There's organic, we don't do organic, but there are organic certifiers. And these are tended to be done in addition to a GFSI audit. Well, if you cover them in an addendum, you can get it done at the same time. If you want to go with a full second party audit and develop your own audit, you can build all these things in there. It also allows you an opportunity to judge the weights and measures. Is this company meeting their label claim? Are they filling to the right level with the liquid? Are they meeting the weight claims? Most of those have nothing to do with food safety, but they are regulatory requirements. So does your GFSI scheme require that? If not, the addendum most probably will, and definitely the second party audit will. Because the customer obviously wants to get the weight or the volume that's on the label. And yes, if you do start to try to sell a product underweight, you can have it pulled out of the stores because you're not meeting the weights and measures. But that tends to be a different government agency, especially here in the States. It allows for greater specificity and detail in what needs to be addressed. And now you can get into, if you're going to have your addendum or you're going to have your second party audit, you can start to write a lot of requirements that you want the auditor to judge the supplier against. So you can get very prescriptive. And in some cases, you need to get prescriptive if you want the auditors to be consistent, to gather the information you want, to understand what you want, and to be able to present to you in the audit report what the compliance or non-compliance was. And in order to do this, the auditor is now going to start to pull more records. He's going to pull records like, I want to see your organic certification. I'd like to see your organic certification audit done by the organic certified body. I want to see your shelf life studies, which were based on quality. I want to see how often you verify that and make sure you're meeting that shelf life. I want to take a look at your weights and records, at weights and measures records, to make sure you're meeting your weights and measures requirements. I can look at all those records now because they're in the addendum or they're in that second party audit. but they were not necessarily things that I would have looked at in a GFSI audit, and I certainly wouldn't have been looking at them in the old GMP GDP audit. We've talked a lot recently about the fact that now it is a requirement to do environmental monitoring, whether you're based in America or whether you're up in Canada or whether you're USDA, FDA, CFIA. You have to do environmental monitoring for ready to eat. But I carry products in my store that are ready to heat. Therefore, they're not going to get heated by the consumer to temperatures that would be lethal to any environmental pathogens that would get in the product. So now I'm going to require you in my second party audit or addendum to be doing environmental monitoring for these ready-to-eat products, because if you contaminate those, the consumer is going to heat them to 120, 130, but they're not going to heat them all the way up to 160. And therefore, if you get them contaminated with environmental pathogens, it's going to be a problem. Well, I have the advantage now with an addendum to add that to your audit. And I can also now say, well, I'm going to have the auditor do some environmental swabbing when they're in your facility, particularly if you're carrying a product that is considered high risk, it's ready to eat, it's a product that will support the rapid growth of harmful bacteria. Then I'm going to ask the auditor now, on my behalf, when he's auditing you, to do environmental swabbing, actually do environmental swabbing, not just look at your results. I got that ability if I add an addendum. I got that ability if I develop a second party audit report. There would be no secrets to you because I'm going to share the addendum. I'm going to share the second party audit report with you before I come. It also allows me to pick up samples of products. Maybe I say to the auditor, I want you to pick up some of our products, and maybe one of the criteria is you have to be making my product when I'm in there doing the audits. And I say, I want you to pick up some of the products, and I want you to send it off to a lab, and I'll pick the lab myself, and I want them to test it. Generally in the GFSI audit, that is not part of the requirement. And it certainly wasn't in GDP audits. Now, which lab am I going to send it to? I can pick the lab now. So it's my lab that I'm picking. And in my case, I, as a customer, may very well be paying the bill to have it tested. But it's an additional thing that I want because I want to make sure it's done by an accredited lab using an accredited international analytical method, and that the results will come directly to me without me having to ask the supplier to ask the lab to send them to me, because I'm paying the bill now. So I can get these results. And this may be something that your customer wants. Well, you're not going to get that in most GFSI audits. You're not going to get that in GDP audits. So another thing that has tended to change over the years was when we used to go in years ago and do GDP and GMP audits, we used to conduct a traceability exercise during the audit. And we used to say that you had to do that while we were there. And then some of the GFSI audits said, no, as long as the companies don't want to can show you the results, then they don't have to do one. Well, based on that, the auditor doesn't have the right to ask you to do one unless he somewhat is questioning the validity of the exercise that you presented to them. But now in a second party audit addendum or a second party audit, I can say, no, I want the auditor to do the exercise while they're there. I can also have the auditor now do a mock recall while they're there. So I can therefore reinforce some of the things in the GFSI audit, but make sure that I'm getting evidence created at the time I'm there, and not be looking at some exercise that it was done a week before, 2 weeks before, 3 months before, and I'm judging that it's been done, and I'm assuming it's credible, but I'm on the basis of assuming when I could verify better if you did it while I'm there. I can also now get into specifying the size of the metal detector test ones versus maybe you picked ones that based on your hazard analysis, you have decided is the test piece sizes. And I can maybe now say, no, I want them to be smaller. I want you to make sure that your metal detector is more sensitive. And so I'm going to specify in order to meet my requirements, that you meet my requirements for the size of the metal detector test ones. Also, one of the questions is when you're doing a mock recall or even doing a traceability exercise, how much are you supposed to find? Everybody says 100%, but 100% is unrealistic. So is it 100% plus or minus 2%? What do you say? Because if you say 100%, then if you get 99.5, you failed. If you get 100.5, you failed. So now the question is, how long did it take you to do that? And you say, well, the time limit in the thing was 4 hours. And maybe that's internationally acceptable. But now I'm going to specify I want it done in 2 hours. And anything that takes longer than 2 hours is a failure of that part of the audit. I'm much more in control if I want to get that specific. Now, it doesn't mean you have to get that specific. It doesn't mean everybody wants to get that specific. So again, I'm not trying to say GFSI isn't what it needs to be, but for some people, maybe it isn't. So what should you consider for your second party audit program if you're going to go this way? Party audits, unless there's a real need for it, and with some customers there is, particularly if your name is on the product and you own a retail store and pretty well all the product in your store has got your name on it, then I don't think you would necessarily want to entrust that to a general GFSI audit. It may not have all of the benefits that you want in that audit. But now if you're going to put one together, you have to say to yourself, well, what is going to be the basis of this audit? Am I going to grade it or not grade it? And if I'm going to grade it, am I going to give it a score and a grade, or just a grade, like excellent, good? Or am I going to give it a score and 100%, 95%, 80%? What am I going to do? So you have to decide on that. Am I going to make the audit educational or punitive? Well, the idea is if you're trying to work with your supplier, you're trying to get them better, because the one thing you don't want to do is keep changing suppliers. So therefore, if you've got the ability to help your supplier get where they need to be, then you both win. They win, you win. So therefore, sometimes you may have to provide them with the help to get where they need to be if they don't have that type of knowledge at their facility. And that doesn't mean don't do business with them, but it does mean that you want to help them manage their risk, because their risk becomes your risk. Are you going to have the audit be a pass and fail? Or is it going to be just a list of your compliance or non-compliance with the audit criteria? And then I'll consult with you to decide how you're going to correct the non-compliances. And I may even offer you training. I may offer you training in environmental monitoring. I may offer you training in how to understand food safety hazards. I may give you training in how you're going to set up a shelf life program for quality. Depends how much you want to help your supplier be better for you, because in the end result, it pays off dividends to you. Well, you've got that flexibility with a second party audit. You can consult with them. You can help them. You can train them. A lot of that is not available under the GFSI audit, that the same people who are auditing you can't necessarily be helping you, because that, on an accredited audit, is considered a conflict of interest, but in a second party audit, it's not. You can personally review all the audit reports, because right now, generally the audit reports are being reviewed by the certifying body, pass and fail decisions are being made by the certifying body and the auditor, and you get to see the report later. But in this case, you can be the one who sees the report and makes a decision on the severity yourself. You can then also decide what the time frame is. GFSI has set time frames to fix things. You can now set them based on the seriousness of the problem. Yes, that's just serious. I want that done within a couple of weeks. That's not that serious, so as long as you get it done the next couple of months. Well, that's really not very serious at all, so as long as you get it done before you have your next audit. You can make those determinations yourself. So therefore, you can wait until the customer does a root cause analysis, develops a corrective action, and you can even be involved in that and say to them, I agree with your root cause analysis, but I don't agree with your corrective action. What we believe is going to be a corrective action, because we think if what you're going to do is not going to correct the problem, and we're going to help you come up with it. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to form a positive partnership with the supplier. That's the reason why some companies are doing this. And who's doing it? People whose name is on the product. They're not that necessarily concerned about in the retail store the national brands, because the responsibility and the liability for those products is going to go back against whose name is on the product. But when it's your name on the product, there is nobody to bounce the problems off and the liabilities off and tell the customer it's not our fault, it's the national brand's fault when it's got your name on the product. You can also use your own auditors. You can basically train your own auditors and send out your own auditors. And we work with some customers who do that. We've helped them get their auditors where they need to be. And then they do sometimes the initial audit to approve a supplier. And then we do the maintenance audits from there on in. They get the benefit of, they make the decision to approve the supplier in the first place, and we get to help maintain that the supplier is meeting the audit. You have all that ability. You can determine how often you're going to have them audited. You can't do that if it's a GFSI audit that says that they have to be audited every year. You can't start saying, well, these will be annual, these will be biannual, and these will be every 3 years. But with a second party audit, you can. You can go out and shadow the auditors, and you can actually help the auditors, and you can help train the auditors, and you can be a witness who's a helpful witness. And the idea is everybody gets better. Your auditors get better, your suppliers get better, you get better. And why are you doing it? Mainly not for food safety. You're doing it mainly for the things that don't come with a GFSI GDP audit. But if that's not what's a criteria for you, then I'm not sure why you would want to invest all of the time and effort into a second party audit if quality is not a big determining factor for you. But it will be if your customer says it is. And therefore, what we're trying to satisfy all along is that we put safe food in front of the customer, but we also put good quality food in front of the customer, reliable, consistent quality food, because food safety is a given, quality is expected, but not always given. So therefore, you can categorize your suppliers into high, medium, and low risk, and determine, therefore, how often they would be audited. You may even take some categories of the audits and say, these are not applicable to this particular supplier because they're low risk. So we're not too worried about these things. So spend more time on these things and less time on other things. You can make those determinations. If it's your addendum or it's your second party audit, you can avoid it being uploaded to an accessible website where anybody else can see it. You can keep it just for you. And in most cases, it is for you. It is a requirement to be a supplier to you. You can also decide to disqualify or suspend a supplier. Whereas with some of those GFSI audits, if they fail, they fail. Their certificate is suspended. You didn't make that decision. The score made that decision. And when they're suspended, it may be suspended for a week, a month, 2 months, or it may actually be withdrawn. that's out of your control. In this case, it's in your control. Everything's in your control. So you may not have a thing where pass and fail. You just say, we're not interested in passing and failing our suppliers. We're interested in finding out what they're doing, food safety and quality, weights and measures, label claims, etc. And we're going to work with them to get them better because we want to keep them. So we're not going to entertain the word fail with our auditors in the audit description or anything. We're not going to talk about disqualifying or suspending a supplier. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't, it doesn't mean you can't, but it isn't a word that you throw around. You own the audit report. And as you own the audit report, it's yours. And it isn't shared with suppliers or other customers. Whereas sometimes the audit report can be out in some type of website and be accessible to more than just yourself, because particularly if the supplier pays for the audit. But in this case, it's your audit, it's a criteria that you've set up yourself. So hopefully that gives you a little understanding where we've been, where we are, and you heard today that we still got people do GDP and GMP, which is fine. We've heard of people doing GFSI, and I'm assuming they're doing any one of the four. We've heard of some people who are doing addendums. And we heard of maybe some people are on the call who are actually having second-party audits done entirely on them. So Holly, what type of questions have we got for the last 15 minutes of our webinar today?
Thanks very much, Dr. Bob. Lots of questions here. That was a really good oversight. Lots of questions as we go along here. So let's get cracking here. If you can just start with, can you clarify, is there a GFSI, or as we call it, third-party audit that is mandated by federal regulations?
No.
Okay.
The FDA does not recognize, nor does USDA. CFIA recognizes GFSI, but they don't specify one particular one.
Okay. Can you just comment on which scheme has a certification of 3 years?
FSSC 22,000.
Yep. And the, which scheme does not require proof of fix until the next audit finding for minor findings?
FSSC 22,000.
Okay, very good. Can you just comment? Let me just have a look here. What are your thoughts, Dr. Bob, on maintaining records of second-party audits performed by customers?
Well, the question is, are you asking that question because you think they may be accessible to the FDA? I don't think the FDA is going to go look at them. If that's your worry, I wouldn't keep them. But again, that's between you and your customer on how long you want to keep those second-party audits.
Yep, fair point. Are these audits risk-based? Is your ASL risk-based? Forgive me, I don't know what ASL refers to.
They're all supposed to be risk-based, and that's the decision on who's determining the risk. And the risk is in the eyes of two different people. One, the consumer, and two, the person who is your customer, which isn't always the consumer. So you're meeting the risks that are associated with them, and in their determination, what they consider the risks are.
Okay. We are a service-based, low-risk warehouse that brings food products owned by our customers. Are we exempt from performing a second-party audit to our customers? So is it a requirement?
Well, a second-party audit will be determined by your customers. It won't be determined by a regulator. To say that therefore you don't have to have a second-party audit. Just make sure you're in compliance with the regulatory requirements, whatever country you're in, and that you don't run foul of the regulators.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Approved supplier list is ASL. Got it. If you are, getting a couple questions in here. Are the suppliers being audited responsible to verify that the auditor is qualified? So who owns that responsibility?
Yes, certainly. If you're being audited by an auditor and you want to know if they're actually qualified in the category to which your products fall, I would certainly ask them for evidence that they are qualified. And most of the schemes give out cards to the auditors listing the categories that they are qualified in. If you talk about the FDA's new food safety plans, it says that the auditor has to have been trained in PCQI or have knowledge to be sufficient to be a PCQI person. So in that case, I would be asking the auditor if they went to PCQI, that's Preventive Controls Qualified Individual Training, if they're going to be auditing me against the new FDA food safety plan requirements. Certainly be asking the auditor for that, asking the certifying body for that ahead of time, but definitely asking the auditor when they walk in.
Yep. Okay, very good. Can you just comment on whether there are passing failure criteria for any of the GFSI schemes?
Yes, there is pass and fail criteria for pretty well all of them, except for FSSC 22000.
Yeah. To the webinar attendee that asked that question, we actually have a separate webinar that we ran on a number of the differences and similarities between the GFSI schemes, so I'm happy to share that separately. Okay. We are BRC certified, but not familiar with SQF. I've been told BRC covers quite a bit more aspects, not only in food safety, but also in product quality. Can you comment on this?
Yes, it is. BRC has a lot more in its audit than SQF does. But when it comes to food safety, they are judged to be equal, but BRC adds a lot of quality in their audit.
Yeah, sure. Can you just comment on how does an auditor specify size of metal detector wands? Are most metal detector wands used the optimum ones for the capability of that detector? So if you've conducted a validation study to prove the detector can't detect lower size wands, you get where we're going here. Can you just comment on how we sort of evaluate that?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yeah, obviously you can't turn the sensitivity of your metal detector up to a level where it will reject your product. So one of the criteria has to be is what is the conductivity of your product? And so therefore, how sensitive can you have the metal detector, but yet have your product not get rejected? That would be number one. So turning up the sensitivity to go then that you could do. Those would be the stuff that you would be able to show a third-party auditor. And if you go with a second-party audit, those are the things you can discuss with a second-party auditor. I don't think any auditor is going to determine you have to go with smaller test piece sizes that you are showing that if you do and turn up the sensitivity on your metal detector, it's going to reject all your product.
Okay, very good. If you found a co-packer that is not certified to a scheme, are you as a customer able to go in and perform an audit based on an audit plan created with the SQF scheme in mind? So I guess any just GFSI, but SQF in mind, and audit a facility. So would that audit then be accepted by SQF to support an inspection being formed?
No, it would have to be done by an SQF qualified auditor to do that, and I didn't hear that being part of the criteria. For SQF to accept any audit, it would have to be done to their criteria by one of their approved auditors trained by them.
Yeah, so it has to do with the auditor capabilities, not so much the replication of the checklist.
Right.
Yeah, okay. For a third-party audit or a GFSI audit, is the audit report confidential or can it be shared with the supplier or customer?
It's confidential and only can be shared with anybody on written requests for that to happen from the person who is the one who is asking for the audit. So if I'm asking you as a supplier to have an audit and you have the audits and you provide an audit report, then you have another customer of yours who says, I want to see that audit report, then I would have the right to say that you cannot be released because I'm the one who paid for the audit.
Okay, very good. You just have a comb through. That's it. Okay, great. We've answered all of the questions. So thanks to everyone for your attendance today. Dr. Bob, thank you very much for your presentation. A reminder, we've recorded and we'll distribute a link to the recording and the deck within a few business days. And have a wonderful day. Thanks again.